embroidery. In this video, I will show you how to make repairs to various plastic, fiberglass, and composite RV parts. One of the main points of the video is to show you my hinge technique, which is a simple way to handle larger pieces of Luan plywood and fiberglass reinforced sheets, so when gluing up new parts, they will be perfectly aligned. Another main point of the video is to use a layout transfer template or mud map to locate your wall cutouts or openings. This template increases accurateness when cutting out openings and also serves as masking material. As I go along, I mention tips and techniques. If you're doing this for the first time, review the video a few times pertaining to the section you're working on. Take your time. Even practice a dry run to make sure you and your tools can reach all the places they need to. Practice and test on small pieces to see if you like the results. You'll need a few simple tools and supplies. You can substitute and improvise as you go along on your projects. This work can save you a lot of money if you're doing it for yourself and will far outweigh the cost of a few additional tools. And who has enough tools anyway? Remember, the more you take apart, the less you have to add molding around. And if there's one thing I've learned when working on motorhomes and travel trailers is, the shortest distance is the long way around. We pick up the video on the last part of a take-apart stage, repairing a lower sidewall below the feature strip, most common repair that I make. We'll get on to some other repairs a little bit later on. Thanks. I've pinned the awning. What I'm going to do next, unbolt it and just hang the hardware up here. And I can take the awning arm off and leaving the rafter on, which I can manage. If I just take the whole awning all the way off, get it out of your way. When I get the back, I failed to mention that I came forward, put this in the roll down position, made it easy for me to roll the awning forward to find the holes where the original pin was, the shipping pin. And in the roll down position, this awning is locked. Barring any factors, maneuvers with the lever, should be able to take this right out. Always test it over here. If you require pre-thread it through the wrapper on over there, bracket. During the take apart, the best thing to do is just keep one bucket for all your screws. You won't be using a lot of silver, but sometimes they're a reference as to what went where. If you have any complicated things going together or something that looks a little different, you might not remember, just make a note. Put the note in the bucket and read all your notes. Anytime you have screws that won't come out, just take a putty knife or a regular knife, help the threads along. When these Christmas tree fasteners, rather than try to pull them out, it's a lot better to just sever the head and then drive it through later with a 3/16 punch. Another idea, during the take apart, if you have two wires and there's two different colors, on some turn signal or marker light combinations, especially on the front, the side marker light is run in conjunction with the turn signal. So just to, in any case, anytime you cut a wire, always cut it on the colored part, and you'll know which way to reattach it later on. Whenever you're removing a side molding or a door or something that's been silicone in, it's always good to make a trace on the top end with a regular razor knife. You do that twice. So you kind of feel you pass the caulking. Well, this molding on this version of the Winnebago or Tasca is held on with a double-edged tape. Lots of times it'll fall right off. A lot of times it won't. The little system I like to use is I take some watered down Windex and spray above the molding line so that I can use it as a lubricant. Then I get a knife, one of the break-off blade knives, using the long blade, sneak it down behind. Cut the tape. This job can be very difficult at times if the tape is stuck really well and if the vehicle's had a good couple of chances to be in the sun. And once you get by obstacles, the Windex helps you cut and stay separated. You can use water, soapy water, but I like to use Windex. Seems to be no residue. Sometimes you'll have to slice the whole thing. And if you're worried about marking the upper part of the camper, you can roll your 2-inch tape out. If you pull on this, it's going to bend the molding. And in a lot of cases, it's just as easy to get new molding. But if you pull hard enough, it can damage the sidewall and add to your de-lam dilemma. We'd love to be using a lubricant here, but you know, before you paint anything, you don't want to spray any silicone in your shop, any greasers around the camper. It just makes it much more difficult to battle the old finishing problems of fish eyes. So Windex and soapy things, because we'll keep all that fish eyeing to a minimum. Just a quick thing about the Windex idea is same thing on roof seals, older roofs, things like that, where you have the acrylar type materials, very tough things on your putty knife. A little bit of Windex or some soapy spray that you make up will cut your time by 2/3 getting underneath that stuff and being able to keep the knife moving and getting your roof cleaned off or any other type of adhesives. And same thing with butyl tape around a window. If you're taking the window out, you want to remember to use Windex, putting your knife in and actually cutting the butyl tape. When you spray with Windex or some other, or water even, it prevents the butyl tape from sticking to itself temporarily. It's a big help in getting your knife around underneath the black butyl tape, things like that, where it holds in the side windows. A couple of things about removing the entry door. Entry door has the step switch. It's located right here. You're just going to unscrew this and push the wires back. And on the entry doors, there's a locking stud for the door lock, the jamb, wherever. This is what adjusts your door. There's no need to take apart the plastic pieces in the back, unless you find for some reason somebody's done something and it hangs up when you go to remove the door. This one had a broken screw. We'll fix that a little later. On these particular models, the most arduous task is to remove the bottom molding, the sidewall bottom molding, when there's a low compartment door. You can see I've unscrewed the compartment door from the inside of the sidewall. You can get a good shot there. With the wedge made out of wood, or if you have any other tools like that, you can stick a wedge down. You can either locate the screws from the bottom, from the top. The ones in the middle are fairly easy to get out. I can flex it just a little. Just make a right angle screwdriver with a tip and a ratchet wrench. Sometimes I use a bar or hold my bit into the screw. Some of them, if it's badly corroded, you're going to have to knock out with a chisel. You put these back, you use hex head screws, it's much easier to get them in and out. These screws right here, don't know if you can see it. Well, you get the picture. You wedge out the side of the compartment. Up near the ends, if there's a screw, sometimes it's a lot more difficult. But this is, once you're over this hump, that's the worst is over. After you remove the plastic outer skirt of the wheel well, there's an aluminum air wheel cap that covers the inside of the lamination. This you can remove. It's usually 3 staples on each side on the earlier models, like 94 vintage like this one. After a while they use screws, which make it a lot easier to get these off. This is one case where we're really glad it didn't go really too crazy with the stapler. The thing I'm going to mention right here, when you're working near the gasoline, you're removing the shroud that holds the gas cap filler on, and you remove the gas cap while you're working in this area. Don't do this with a Makita drill. Use an air drill or a hand screwdriver, because if you bring the vehicle in and the gasoline is vaporing, you could have a possibility of igniting your gas when you take it off. So always use air tools or hand tools around the gas and the gas filler. Use an aggressive stick 2-inch tape. This brand is American tape, and we've been using this successfully for quite a few years. Give yourself a little bit of an indent so you got room to cut around, and you're going to cut out any openings in the glass in the wood composite. This will tie in with our masking paper and marking paper that we use, which will show up here in a few minutes. I have the luxury that I have some of these cardboard templates left over from the last job I did. And I saved the cutouts from all the door openings. This gives you templates for your next one, although they're usually a little smaller, and they make for very nice repair material. In the case of the furnace, I'm going to try to push it in a little. The last one I did, I had to take the furnace out. So then I had to go through all that procedural stuff. This is pushing up against the duct, but if you can gain it a little bit, that's all you need. Yep, I'll leave that in this time. I'm going to be marking the first cut. I'm going to use a router to cut. This is what's called the feature strip area. I'm going to use the center lines of the screw molding to be where I make my cut for this. I'm going to measure down 1.5 inches because my particular router has 1.5 inches on center, and I'll be using a 3/16 router bit to make this cut. But it's a rough within 1/4 inch. I like to get pretty much on center with the bottom of the cut. So I use these screw lines as a general guideline, and I can just use the 1.5 inch width in this particular framing square. If your router has a different center, you may have to make up a jig or something like that to get yourself started with the ledger board that we're going to use for a guide for the router. Unless I got a piece of residual screw in here, I don't want my router to run through. Throwing the legs around about 100 pounds of air.
For this part, we just want to score through the fiberglass and the luan, lightly scoring the foam underneath. This is about a 3/16 cut. You can experiment with it a little. If you go a little bit too deep, it really won't hurt anything. But the idea is to preserve as much underneath in the foam as you can, and just getting through. In this case, we're going to cut through both the Phylon or fiberglass and the luan together.
Another cut you can make with your jig, where we're set right now for cutting through the Phylon and the luan, and hopefully just lightly scoring the foam, which never hurts to lightly score it. You can also go underneath the jig at the same time. That will cause less jig movements or guide movements for the router and get extra cuts. Another thing I'll mention here is in this rig, the Phylon and the wood are very wet. It's just about pouring off. But in areas where you feel that it's tight and not very loose, you're going to want the extra router marks. And it helps you out in the long run to leave the Phylon on to make those cuts, because you'll have an even surface rather than having nothing to screw into and trying to use a guide if you have a problem with a very tight and very well glued piece of luan under the Phylon. You may get the Phylon off a layer of wood, but you really want to keep this on and route through both areas while you have the file on as a good guide. It makes it a lot easier and simpler just to get it over with all at once. Somewhere along this process, we put up some brown paper or any type, you can two layers of 3-foot masking paper. It's going to serve as a template marker for me, and it's also going to be my masking paper for both the glue and the paint phase. The reason we're going up higher is because with this particular method, which is called the hinge method, we're going to be actually folding up our lower piece of Phylon right up onto this piece of paper for shooting it with glue, or even if we put it on with the brush. So I'm going to go down the camper and just put some tape and some marks right at about the 5-foot 1-inch mark from our center line going upward. That's all determined by how big your paper is or whatever you want to do here. There's no cut and set rules, but this 5-foot paper works really well for this particular repair. And you only have to be approximate because you get the paper, but it does work, but the smoother and nicer you get the paper, the nicer the whole job comes out. As you go down the line, you leave a few pieces of paper, a few pieces of tape. You can use that to hold your paper as you go along. You can make a paper roller yourself with a piece of conduit, a disc from a grinder, for any length of paper you have, or a piece of PVC pipe, and you can walk down the camper and unroll this by yourself. It makes it a little easier to do the job by yourself, but if you've got a few people or a couple ladders, it's just the same. How do you do this quite successfully? Just roll it down the paper as you go to your tape lines and your tape marks, then come back and square up the paper. Now with either 2-inch or 1-inch tape, whatever you prefer. I've got an H3 board here. I can go ahead and tape down somewhere close to the center with this tape. Or in this case here, I've got to make a little air dam. Now this part of the process is you're working on a camper that all the openings where the compartments and the doors are lined with metal, wood, or something like that, and you feel you have a perfect router area for the ball bearing on your router to travel, you can go ahead and not trace these out. In the case where you have foam and miscellaneous substrates that may not be in good condition, it pays much better off in the long run to up-trace your lines to your masking paper, so you'll always have a reference on where these are. Using a straight edge and a framing square, it's really simple to do. Well, I take a lot of this off. You can do it after the Phylon's off, but sometimes it's nice to use the edge, especially if you're replacing the same door. You can trace up from the inside or outside, try to stay square. Give yourself a sideline on both sides. Pen or pencil gives a much better line than a magic marker. You can see in the paper it can move a little. You could be off a little bit. Maybe I'll use a little magic marker just so you can see them. But then I take a framing square. In this case, it works quite well most of the time. I go to the bottom, and I know that at 24 inches, I'll make a bottom mark on 2 or 3 places. If it's a long door, because I only have a 12-foot straight edge. And not inside the radiuses, go to the top of the door, do the same thing. You can, if you want to, trace these right out, and it doesn't hurt, because if you end up having a long time in between when you can get back to this job, if you have a delay, sometimes like me, I forget what's going on, and I'll know exactly where these doors are. We'll get into it a little bit later. To make life easy, take a scrap piece of Luan plywood, make yourself a jig for the inside corners you're going to use. And then if you feel like it, you can just draw these in right now. There's no need to, because you're going to draw them down later on the other piece of paper. But if this is the first time you're doing this job, you're going to feel a lot more comfortable knowing the whole situation. Because sometimes you'll have a square edge door and you want to write right on this map that you're making what radius you have if it's different than the radius you've got. And usually a square corner is what's called a half-inch radius corner. This is just a rough map now of what's going to happen down below. You don't even have to think, because you can make little notes on here, like this is 24 inches to top, 24 inches to bottom if you want. But pretty much, if you do this same thing every time with the framing square, or something you decide to use for a jig, do the same thing over and over, you won't have to know it. But you could say 24 inches, OC, on center. And do that for all your openings. An opening like this where, since we're only fire lining and putting new plywood halfway up, we'll be able to see down where the bottom is. And we're not going to use a router to cut these. We're going to cut these out with an air saw. It's much more delicate and easier to do. You don't have quite as big a mess, and it's a lot more controllable, where we don't have a backer to protect us with a router to be guided along. It doesn't hurt to mark these. If you're doing the job yourself, you can remember a lot of times. I usually like to at least know that it's not the same radius in any particular case. So I've marked that furnace. Doesn't matter if you do it or not. You can see I'm working over the hot water heater area here where I remove the door, get my wall as flat as possible. There'll be lots of little things underneath you. So these lines you have to approximate. When I go back inside, I found if I stay about a 1/4 inch inside of the line, when I make my first cut at the door, it only takes an extra second to make the extra cut, and you're not in any sort of a worry of getting into the foam or cutting your new file on that you just glued up. I'm going to put the edges on again. Just a reminder that this is a radius door, especially if you're only doing this job one time. Do every step. If you're doing this for yourself and you're only going to do it once, do every step that you can think of and more. Write in the dimensions of the opening if you feel like it. You can always start your cuts. We'll get to this later in the video. You can start your cuts way inside, make a window to have a look. You know that if you're in the approximate center of it, you can cut an access hole if you've forgotten where a hole is and sneak your way around. A small repair is a lot easier to fix than a big mess. Opening transfers, which is nice to do it now when you have file on and so on. I'm going to use magic marker this time so you can see it a little better. trace much better in pencil, which I mentioned on the other time I showed this. And you just take the 24-inch square, you can. When your paper is nice and flat, you get a much better mark. You can trust your lines a lot more, and after you do it a few times, you can hang your trusting it a whole bunch more. These ones in the middle here. Really necessary to transfer these now, but it's kind of nice if you want to know exactly where everything is and the radius of the doors. Usually in the gasoline hole, I just try to come up square, and I'll trace that on with the shroud that comes with it. But I'll get the center of the gasoline hole in its outside dimensions. Still do the 24-inch on a small hole, top and bottom. That can just be papered up for now, which we'll be taking that paper right back off after gluing. You'll notice a lot of times things don't seem quite so square and parallel as we'd like to think they are. A couple of double checks. You can fix a big problem. If you have a door that you don't have enough of a lip on that it wasn't covering, you can actually now decide that you're going to make the opening a little bit smaller. You're going to repair that. If you're going to do any changes to your opening, make big notes and magic marker here to remind yourself, or you can go right ahead right now and add some blocking in, so that when you go any further along in the process, that it'll be constantly there and you won't forget about doing it.
Okay, we're going to get back and finish up the rest of the routing. thing about the router is that you can make any of these cuts with an air saw or any delicate saw if you want to do that. The router is certainly the easiest way, and the air router certainly will last a lot longer than electric router. The fiberglass parts seem to get into the router brushes and make them wear out very quickly. So an air saw is your second choice. An air router, they're about $170, $180. Is your first choice, but you can do all of this with an air saw. It makes fine little cuts in the foam, and they've never done any damage. Works quite well.
Another thing that happens is sometimes when you've got big wet areas, large pieces of pylon will fall off, and if this is the first time you're doing this job, save these pieces of pylon because they're exact templates of what you're going to be recutting, and really helps in the area of like the gas holder, the gas shroud, and sometimes the wheel well. And a lot of times in complicated nose and cap situations, you're going to find a lot of interesting holes and places for lights and things and mounts that you want to have a record of this. It also can help in your striping on the upper part of the body. So sometimes it's good just to save these to the end and throw them away. You've made enough lines and you think you've freed up most of your pylon and luan. We're going to start the peeling part of the process. This part, just a razor knife, 3 or 4 inch putty knife. I don't know if this is showable. I'll do a close-up later. This is ground at a curve. Seems to work best for this particular method, and sometimes you use the back of the knife or the front of the knife, depending on whether you want to gouge out the foam or not. This particular motor foam has the blue foam, which isn't being used anymore, by Winnebago anyway, and most other manufacturers that I've been looking at have all switched to the white pebble styrofoam, and it's a very much more fragile foam. A lot of times where it's wet, it won't come off. The final layer won't come off. Either you'll have to peel that or sand it after it gets dry. So I'm using the back side of the knife with the blade so that when it rides against the foam, it actually pushes out and doesn't cut into the foam. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You're going to end up with lots of things in the foam. They're not really going to matter in the overall job. And any real bad ones we can repair. There's usually a combination to whatever we got for a glue up that'll start working for you. You can find it, depending on how wet the luan is, what type of foam you have. When all else fails, and if you're dealing with the white beaded styrofoam, you're better off to let it dry for a day and come back and sand it off with a board sander. Because every little gouge you make in white styrofoam needs a lot more stuff you have to conversion coat, which we'll get into a little bit later. The little pieces of foam you chop off, just save them. You can glue those in with liquid nails or white glue. Or epoxy. 5-minute epoxy works really well. And you get kind of a waterproof. This piece of foam has come off the backing and the Luan. It's a lot easier to glue this with 2-part epoxy, which I'll show you a little bit later. We'll do that glue up. This is just to give you an idea about what's wet and what's not. And in this case, we know above the feature strip there's a little bit of delamination, so we're going to have a look at how we can fix that without causing too many cosmetic problems in the body. Yourself, you'll see very shortly that when we get this repair back together, that this won't happen again, or not as quickly. If you have a board sander, you can sand this last bit of wood off. That's very difficult. In some cases, this wood will fall off, peel off very easily. Last resort, and especially on the coaches with the white foam, sanding this last layer down to the glue is the best thing. You don't have to take it down to bare foam, just down to this glue, which gives us an excellent barrier for our contact adhesive without damaging the foam. So this seems a little tedious at first, but with like a 36 or 40 grit paper on a board sander or a DA, you can sand this down and just bring it to the glue and it'll average out very nicely.
cut, we're just trying to cut through the fiberglass with a pylon and leave the luan underneath. This is a pretty glued up area, so we're going to have to pull this apart. But this cut here is just so we can make an overlapping repair. We've cut back the pylon fiberglass a little bit, an inch and a half back from the wood. We'll make a lapping repair here. This is a slightly better way to make the repair. You don't have to do this in all cases, but if there's any area that may go some stress, this repair will last a lot longer. Other repairs can be made in blue foam with regular fiberglass reinforced bondo, such as Dynaglass or PPG's got one. Any of the fiberglass with the fine hair won't actually melt it, although it's a polyester-based type resin. There's enough fillers and solids in there where if you don't generate too much heat by using too much hardener, you'll be able to fill holes and small voids and cracks with the fiberglass repair material. Here we're using regular Dynatron, two-part epoxy, slow cure. Get up behind this piece of foam that's really loose. You can squish as much epoxy as you want up in there. It doesn't get too warm when it hardens. It'll make a real good repair. We'll just take this down over that and we'll have a very good backing. Set up to make a heat tunnel here where we're only de-lammed up about 2 inches, and we want to be able to get some air up in there. It hasn't bubbled the luan, so this is something we know if we dry out real good, we'll be able to epoxy it with a 2-part cement, and it should make a good repair. Then we're going to finish this up by putting just a regular 1200 watt hair dryer at the end and blowing some air through it for a couple hours and making sure it's good and dry. So we made a little heat tunnel. We just have the hair dryer on medium heat. We don't want too much heat in there too little. We found this technique dries things out quite well in 1 to 2 hours. If it hasn't gone too deep, other than that, it may take a little longer. After a good drying, we're brushing 2-part epoxy into the repair area. This area is above the feature strip, but is accessible from our cut. You'll need to make a jig to apply just enough pressure to hold your parts flat. Using thin sticks sprung from the wall makes a good job of this. If you're using foam-covered boards, you can first wipe excess epoxy off the fire line with acetone on a rag, then use wax paper between your foam boards and the fire line so they won't get stuck. We're applying the conversion coat. Conversion coats are anything you can use, such as, in this case we're using Herco Seal, which is a
you'll be able to get the address from either the back of the video or the brochure. You can use bin, any of those type of shellac or alcohol-based type blockers, or any latex moisture blocker works just as well. What happens is that, especially on the white foam, when you spray up solvent-based contact adhesives, it will eat right through the foam. You can do it on the blue foam and get away with it, but this conversion code saves you a lot of headaches and worry about wrecking the foam. Just simply apply a wet coat of anything you like. Water plug is another one that works well. The little gouges and everything that we've made from before, just work some of your blocker in there. You can give it 2 coats, you can do anything. At some point, there's a diminishing return where your in-between coat may be weaker. We found that it works quite well. Here's where the term hinge technique comes in. Going to make a hinge for the Luan. Made my upper cutoff. I'm just building a little bridge for the tape chute here to add a little strength in this area, and I'll bring the masking taper back down. This is where an aggressive tape comes in handy when you're woodworking. I'm going to make all my breaks clean at the edges of any panel. That way you won't have any problems with one panel trying to pull the other, because this can be done in the 8-foot sections of the panel. You can tape it all and just slide it later. Well step, or door entry step under here that's not going to let me make a good blow up, so this is one of the cuts we'll make. And another thing I did, which you can avoid if I had calculated correctly, start with an 8-foot sheet so you don't have breaks in places that you don't have a good taping surface. But if you do, in that case, you can just tape the two pieces together. If it's not too long a piece, it should behave itself enough. I'm just going to make a rough with a wheel well. We'll have to do this with the pylon as well. off any detail masking. This stuff isn't like paint as much. It doesn't get all over or float around very much. There's anything in the line of sight. You get a little bit of yeah. I'm going to go down through, put a double roll of all, or a continuous swipe of tape the whole way, and then I'll break at my seam so I can lift the boards individually, put them down individually. Where you know you have space in the wheel well, you tape anywhere. Sometimes you won't get a place to tape, you'll have to remove the tape and actually spray it up and hold it. But once you've got one or two coats of the adhesive on, the strings from the adhesive will be holding it up against the vehicle on its own. Your everyday gravity inexpensive spray gun, mostly made from primer, something with a big nozzle. You can spray sprayable solvent-based contact adhesive. Medium coat seems to be the best, with the first coat going on the lightest, and then you go back over looking for any big blotches that you might have missed or that weren't taking, and just now is the time we have to let it set up a little bit. And the process is that the vapors evaporate and stay very cool. We're not going to wait till it's fully dry, which is something that can happen, but it could get too dry for us to get the bond we're looking for. So a slight tack after the contact adhesive has started to warm up or stop evaporating the solvent, which is a very cold period, then we know it's right to drop. Works very well. I can mention here, you can use tool-all or methyl ethyl ketone after you dump your adhesive out of your gun, and then you can turn that, put the methyl ethyl ketone or the tool-all in the gun and then run it through just to let it come out the nozzle. If not, the contact adhesive could harden in your nozzle. This is just lightly tacky. As soon as all the wet parts get light tack, we'll just drop these walls. These panels. Then with a rubber mallet and a foam block, I'll just pound it around. Using the thicker spray, actually when the adhesive bonds to each other, it kind of spreads out and locks into the irregularities and regular heights. So I prefer the coarser spray than the fine. Many ways you can make it work. A roller or a brush will do it. But you have to spend a little more attention to detail with the conversion coat if you use a roller or a brush, because it goes on a lot wetter. Make sure that your panel is dressed down and that the tape isn't all bunched up on your hinge. Just let them sit there for a second. Make a mistake and your panels actually overlap each other, don't worry, you can just run a little hacksaw blade or the air saw down the seam and they'll lay flat. Once it touches, it's there. While you're tapping it, the top where the plywood meets the old sidewall, tuck it in. You see it's stuck into the boot. Too hard with the hammer, you'd actually dent the foam underneath it. You'd have to do that pretty hard, but pretty much blocking the hammer. Just use the razor knife to cut down between the old sidewall glue-on pylon and the new piece of plywood. I'll just take the tape off and get ready to glue on, make a hinge for our new pylon. This is a pre-cut piece from Winnebago. You can order lots of sizes from them, and it can save you money in the long run, getting just what you need for each job. If you're doing a job that's an entire lower sidewall, on some coaches there's no painting involved. If you do a little research, you can find the right color fiberglass reinforced plastic, and you won't have to do any painting. A lot of times I refer to the fiberglass reinforced plastic as Phylon. Phylon is a brand name of a fiberglass reinforced plastic. You can do all your coarse or rough cuts with hand metal shears, like the left-hand or right-hand type work really well. It makes a little distortion at the edges, but usually we're either doing body work over this or trimming it off later. So regular metal shears, it makes a real fast job of cutting the fiberglass reinforced plastic. Like before, I'm going to make my cutout for the wheel well, and then pin this up and rough up the back. Nylon's heavy. I want to use a little up pressure when I go to my paper to help support some of the weight. I'm going to do an initial wipe down of the surface of that stone, take any travel grease and releasing agent off of it. Then we'll rough it up with some 36 paper. You can do this on the bench if you got a long space. A lot of different ways to do it. You can do it with an air DA sander. Remember, there's a back side and a front side to the pylon. You'll see the lines on the back side. Sometimes they'll wrap it backwards before it, but the thing is higher is where you get it. I'm just going to use a 36 grit DA pad and go over this by hand and scratch the surface up a little. You'll need to blow this off and wipe down before applying the glue. This red solvent-based contact adhesive supplied by Winnebago. The red glue was reminiscent of the older days in RV where everybody used a red glue. It's got a little harder to find. It's made by U.S. Starch. Some of the other companies like All Right Aluminum, and now you can find different versions of solvent-based contact adhesive on the shelf, but the sprayable type you might have to search for a little bit. I've also found that if this glue sat in the can for a little while, you can add a little toluene or the Tulol, just a little bit to make it act a little better, and the gun spray is much nicer thin, just a tiny bit, especially if the adhesive has been in half a can and it's got a little hold. Starting at the seam, I push in to make sure that I don't have any buckles up high. rake it down, I'm going to start at the back so this one's the dry. Not a big hurry to get it to lay down. Somewhere along the line, whatever you feel like, you can start transferring down before your paper gets a chance to get too messed up. You transfer your lines down from your mud map onto your pylon. Remember, we just used this when we set it up, so at 24 inches, bottom of my door. There are lots of brands of campers you can just route these right out with the router with the ball bearing bit at the end. Winnebago's not one of them unless you have quite an elaborate roller set up and you've made sure all your openings have no voids on the rough openings. So I just found that marking it out, cutting it with a saw, saber saw or an air saw, saves a lot of grief. Again, you can take your mighty template or the bottom of a paste bucket, draw in your corners. We're ready to cut out, and I still, when we go to cut it, I'll actually make my first cut maybe a ½ inch in, cut out the whole door, and then I'll trim it out exactly afterwards. It makes for a much neater cut, only takes a little bit more time. transferring the line. I use marker this time. Pencils makes a much more accurate line. So we know that by following this parallel line, more or less, we're in the ballpark. Simple to remember, 24-24 rule. Remember, I'm going to make my cut a quarter to a half inch inside this cut, and then make a finished cut. The new blade on an air saw or saber saw takes absolutely no time at all to cut these out. Second cut will take you an extra 5 to 10 minutes. Well worth it. Somewhere along the line, you can start working on this above the feature strip delam. This is one we're going to have to make some blend-in seams. We'll have to texture it to match the file on. Here again, a little bit of conversion coater. Not totally necessary, definitely beneficial. And the white foam, it's almost, you have to do it. The blue and the pink foam, you kind of stand a little bit of the spray, but still deteriorate very rapidly with the roller or brush. I like to work it in to any cracks and voids. And you can use the two-coat method if you really feel like it. In this case where I'm going to be covering up the total body drilling holes, I'm going to fill those with a little bit of caulk of some kind, either a seam sealer or liquid nails, just to do a little water block there. Good idea, if you're using auxiliary heat to dry something rapidly, to stick a thermometer on the work and try to keep your temperature, not much over 100 degrees. 80, 90, 100 degrees is fine around foam. And you don't want to accelerate your drying of things very rapidly. Sometimes they'll turn brittle. So just stick a thermometer on. You can watch it, set your heat or something low, and you can get an idea of where you're going. Okay, let's cut out some doors while that dries. confident you are doing this, you can cut right to the line the first time and you will feel the foam or the tape and you can guide along. But the first few times you try it, if you allow yourself a half inch, 3/4 of an inch, it's very easy to follow the line exactly the way it was.
Now that you've got this great big access hole, you can see exactly where to cut. You can see right up against the foam, and you can follow the foam around exactly, make a really nice, accurate cut.
Like before, we can use a little piece like this. You don't really need to use the hand. Sometimes it helps. I've sealed up the edges with liquid nails in this case. I've used a little bit of my seam sealer that I'm going to continue this joint with because I want it to dry before the door goes on. In all your openings, it's nice to give them a seal, any type of seal, or from latex paint to, this is one good use for cool seal, if there's any, is to seal the edges of your plywood here, because water has a tendency to sit if it gets in this door. Here, start your de-lam right over. You can use West resin. Another good use of the West resin system do the inside edges of all of these compartment doors. A little bit of paint is better than nothing. I've used a little Dynaglass where my wood gaps were a little big here, and I'm going to average the elevations of the wood together just slightly. So this will help when the glass goes on, that I'll have a slightly more even plane and I won't have to worry about any of the cracks telegraphing through. Like before, a couple of medium coats, doing the pile-on step. Remember, this was an overlapping repair where our joints in the Luan and Phylon are staggered. We masked off the area outside where we accidentally hit this with the grinder. This is where our line is that we're going to make our tapered joint. We're going to grind this out with a regular 5 or 6 inch disc grinder, fairly coarse material, and we're going to use it at an angle so that we can end up with a dish, much like a sheetrock joint where you get the pre-finished sheetrock joints with a taper. So we're going to make a taper that will fill with fiberglass cloth. I know that in some cases I'd be able to save this stripe, but here I'm hoping to make my paint gap underneath this stripe, so I'll actually take this stripe off later. If you really had to save that stripe, you might be able to do it. Usually where you're going to have a blend, it's always easier to end under a stripe if you can take it off, wet sand out the paint edge. You can end it right on the stripe edge, depending on how much time you have to do the job. Any places you go to bare wood, doesn't matter. You're going to be building a fiberglass as thick as your Phylon on this. Your fingers can feel the taper as good as the straight edge can see it, if not better. And you're looking for a taper so that you can support about 3 layers of regular fiberglass fiberglass cloth. One nice little tip you can do is wipe your area down with acetone. Use the 2-rag method or the 1-rag method. This can actually soften the resin in there, the original Phylon. Clean your gouges out. Probably fills in just as many as it cleans out. Regular polyester resin from a can, any sort, with the normal wax resin that you'd buy in an auto parts store. The basic rule for harder is 3% at 70 degrees. And I believe that's a 3% by weight, but if you measure 100 milliliters of resin, you can use 3 cc's or 3 milliliters of hardener. If it's warmer in your shop, you're going to want to pull it back. If it's colder, you're going to want to put a little more in. Another idea is not to put too much more than 4%, 5%, and then when you're all laid up, you can raise the heat up or use a local heat like from a hair dryer to bring on your cure. I'll pre-cut some fiberglass tape. You can buy the tape from most marine supplies. got big gaps, you can actually fill any gaps with some Dynaglass or any fiberglass reinforced Bondo. As long as you want to get in there and sand it off. One thing that happens is you end up with a lot of layers in the corners, so you can stagger them a little. It's good to wet things out, get up and start working your air bubbles out, but later on we're going to come along with a squeegee, putty pal, Bondo plier, whatever you want to call it. Take off any excess resin. Made a narrow strip to save some sanding. 3 layers will just about fill up my taper. A lot of other tricks working with glass. In a little cold area you can cover them up, or just plastic. It'll hold a lot more heat in that's generating on its own. It cures too quick, so it's going to kind of shrink. This sort of repair can be made anywhere in the body, vertical, horizontal, back, front. Remember too, the coarser the sanding underneath it, the better. Everything in our business wants a coarse finish except your final putties and paint. Epoxy, everything holds better to a coarse surface. 36 grit is a good paper to use whenever you're making any sort of repair or you want something else to bond to it. This time we can dig out any pocket voids in the glass, just any of these little places that one layer lapped over the top. You don't gouge them out much, just take any loose glass off. You do this with a pick or a razor knife, but try not to dig through deep and cut any more of your glass. And you can see we've got an edge in our taper, just like a sheetrock joint. Got 3 layers of glass in there. The middle layer we put on is just being disturbed enough to put some top coat over. Look for any voids or bubbles, clean them out as best as you can. It's usually just in the corner where you've made the laps. But you know you still got 2 or 3 layers of glass under there because you've got laps over there and there's little places where air got trapped under there. This was all done with 36 grit paper, blowing this off really well and making a wipeout with acetone and maybe a slight rescuffing. Then we can put a reinforced plastic layer, fiberglass reinforced plastic layer on top of that. We'll do that next. Dynatron, Bondo, Dynaglass, same as PG. It says waterproof reinforced, but this is the basic first putty coat I always use, first plastic coat. The small fiberglass strands bond any voids. Another thing I do is I add a little bit of regular liquid resin to the mixture. I've talked to the company, they say it's very common practice, it's a common practice in the boat industry, to be able to add a little bit of liquid resin to this to make a slightly soupier mixture, which also helps wet out your dry spots and fill any little voids under your glass when you're doing it. I found that works really well in a lot of instances. First coat of Bondo, you want to use a lot of pressure to force it in any voids. If you have voids, work it in and make sure you put a lot of pressure on this to avoid pinholes later on in the repair. So far that I haven't broken into my stripe line, I have stripe to replace this. If you ever have to work close to a stripe, and I've been using 2 layers of tape, which is protected from the sander thus far, I usually don't even try to work this close to a line. But if you want to shave your Bondo up top, you can just use a razor blade. Try to get your Bondo line a little bit down from your stripe so you can tape in a little deeper. Because your last bit here, if you're going to sand this top part here, you may be able to save a stripe like this, especially if you can't get one. You're going to have to paint it. But my full intention with this repair was to make my paint line halfway between the stripe. We'll go into that a little later. This is a curved razor blade, standard everyday edge. You bend it in the middle. You get much closer detailing and you can take off lines of caulk, lots of things like that. Favorite place to use it, along detail lines like that for scraping caulk. The curved razor blade is our #1 tool. Taping and retaping. Remove your tape after every operation if you've done any damage to the edge of the tape, because it'll creep up and get into your repair. Again, this is where the aggressive tape, the name brand American PG27, is a really good tape for this because it's very aggressive and strong. That's a good amount of paper on it. And the paper is compatible with the lighter grade 3M paper. This is set up a little bit late for the cheese grater stage. It's not a really necessary stage. Sometimes I prefer not to disturb my plastic coat. It's a delicate repair that I'm not that confident in. Another thing I like to do is any low spots that didn't get hit with the sandpaper, I like to scrape off the coating because the putty coat, this may contain wax from the resin, and you want all surfaces sanded. You can wipe this off with acetone, but sometimes I'll just spread it around. So it's a critical repair. Look for any gouges that are the lighter spots there and just gouge them out just a little bit. Rough them up. You start coming down into your white, you can see I'm into my layer of fiberglass on the edge of the repair. Don't start going down too much, it's better to just give up, average out with putty. The repair is never dead flat, unless you get real lucky. But the way the sides of motorhomes look, it's not going to matter. The next couple of coats are usually a lightweight Bondo coat and then a polyester finish putty coat, which is just a thin version of Bondo, but it's very soupy. Some people call it a brushable putty, but a very thin consistency. Much better than the old-fashioned lacquer types. Use a fast wipe with acetone and we'll do another putty coat. Very thin, soupy type Bondo, forced hard. Not worried about lines or anything like that. More, I'm worried about pinholes and scratches in my heavy grit paper. Because up to this time, I've stayed in 36 grit paper the whole time. You get a much better bond using coarse paper all the way through, right to this stop. And then after this, it's all fine paper. Use a little less hardener than normal. We do bigger repairs than most auto repairs. If you want a little extra time to work with your putty coat, making sure you get all your scratch lines. If you do another putty coat, you have to sand lightly. You can put it on a little thicker. In our repair area, a coat of high solids, high build polyurethane primer. At this point, it's a nice, you don't always have to prime if you're in a hurry because your material is porous enough, but a primer of this type fills any void. You can actually physically push some of the primer into tiny pinholes. You can sand this off, you get a good visual of where you're at getting ready for your final top coat. I'm going to wet sand this with 400. Just using a foam block right under some 400 paper. Stuff sands. Most of the polyurethane primers sand really fast. This one's Marson. It looks a lot like Euro, which is the DuPont product. And Prism is a Sherwin-Williams product. Or they might call it Color Prime from Sherwin-Williams, which is a tintable one. near the end of my sand zones where I don't want to totally flatten because I'm going to retexture this to the fiberglass that appears in the surface of the Phylon. As you get to the edge of your sanding area where you're going to paint, you can buff it with the machine, but a hand buff after it's been washed is good enough. But right now, I'm just trying to remove my tape line where a little dust had floated and get all the loose dust from the overspray off. But it's a lot better to do it with compound at this point and not rub too hard in any one direction. And you can use a machine with a felt pad, or a foam pad. Applying a seam sealer, this is a fuser or urethane sealer adhesive, which I found works really well. I like to force it into my joint. Sometimes a bigger joint here is a little better because you're going to get a better bond to everything, but a surface bond is good enough here because we're going to actually be coating this with a butyl tape layer. So I've made a tape on the bottom. It doesn't spread too much. You can use a number of different caulks here. If you want one that's going to harden, Silkaflex urethane, which is available at most RV places. You can use windshield urethane, is another good sealer here. You can use a two-powdered epoxy that seems to be a lot more expensive than is necessary. This fuser stuff sells for about $9 a tube. It works really well. And I just come back over that with the spreader, and I'm not trying to spread it flat. I'd like to leave it a little thickness on there. It builds up a nice little gasket. 1/8 of an inch, 1/16 of an inch thick is fine. By the time your butyl tape is on there and your seam molding, it all blend together. The newer old door, they don't originally seal the doors with butyl or putty tape, and they do a good job sealing it with the caulk. If you're uncomfortable doing that, you could take butyl tape, the round 1/4 inch type, and stretch it out and make yourself a nice little 3/16 gasket, which won't have any problem compressing to its original place. It'll make that seal so you don't have to think about it. Doors, the down part, I found these roofing nails have excellent neoprene washers. I've tried to buy the neoprene washers separate, but if you can't, just buy these common roofing nails for galvanized roofing and use these washers. They're very sturdy and they work well with the screw. We're going to make a seal on the bottom of the screw so that when we screw downwards, the water won't be allowed to puddle in the bottom. Another step on the, remember on the bottom holes that sit down towards the bottom frame, Winnebago uses a plastic-coated butyl tape. You don't have this regular butyl tape with the paper left on, works just fine. So this will hug the screw as it goes down through the hole, helping it make a little bit better seal. But just regular butyl tape with paper is fine. Leave the paper right on it to hold it in place. It won't get in the way when you're screwing it down, making the door stick onto the frame. Nice to have your door holders put back on when you're doing these gates. The bottom is kind of squeezed in pretty good. If you want to use a block, you clamp, or if you have the pliers with a smooth surface on them, you usually get enough behind to make a really good squeeze. It doesn't have to be squeezed too hard. Use one of my neoprene screws and try to put it in fairly straight. Two or three ways Winnebago put the top screws in. Sometimes they've used a screw about 1.5 inches long and gone through the foam and up into the a frame member that's steel. I found it pretty hard to do that without drilling it, even with a good tech screw. Or if they have the little aluminum L brackets up in here, you need a very short screw, like a 1/2 inch screw, or it'll go up into the metal. To it. But if you do have to use the long screws, or if your middle's not pulling in and you have to use a long screw, because a lot of times there's no aluminum strip there, you can drill up in with an 1/8 inch drill and then use a number 8 screw and do a fine. Sometimes in the same vintage Winnebago, you'll find that one side they use the long screws and the other side they use clips, so I haven't quite figured that out yet, but just be ready for either case. In case of the Sun Cruiser Adventurer, there's a seat channel made out of aluminum in the sidewall that wraps around a metal floor member. That's how they line their floor up in the sidewall. So you'll find yourself to go through the aluminum channel, and then right after that, you feel a little bit of steel. You can do that twice with the 2 holes, like, or just do it for the one, it'll hold fine. And you can use the same technique for striping. And if you got a door or something in the way, you can just bring yourself close to your tape line with a piece of tape. Find a height you like, an average across the coach. You can bring this right down. It doesn't have to touch the coach. I'll look up the other end here for a sec. know that we made seam cuts and that this is a little, maybe a weak spot of attaching the molding. Sometimes the new number 6 screws hold quite well, a 3/4 inch screw. You use epoxy on your seam or a seam seal, you're going to get a pretty tight screw hold, and the butyl tape certainly helps to hold it on. Well, another thing we know is that about 1 1/8 inches inside from here, there's a steel member with that aluminum channel, the same one we use to attach our doors to. We can go in and drill into that. A tech screw will not drill through it for some reason. small drill first, you're going to lose the least amount of your butyl tape through this hole. If you're a fanatic about the coach, it's your own coach or something you want to do, go all the way down through. Drill these out in between your other screws on center. Just through the metal part, I'm going to drill a 3/16 hole for my screw head to sit in. I have some nice screws there. Number 8 screws with number 6 heads by 1.5 inches. They're a perfect screw for this job. Want to consider doing is finishing these screws by hand so that you don't put them in too much. You don't want to bend in the sidewall. You can kind of adjust it just about perfectly straight. It really pulls that sidewall together. In most instances, this is too much of a pain to do, but if somebody's willing to the value of the repair, that this really pulls that butyl tape in. You get a little too tight, just back it right off. You see your file on compressing the foam. Just a little bit. When I took the cap off, but you can do all your connections right in front. You can lift the cap off by yourself. You undo the windshield wipers, you pull them off. Sometimes you need a little bit of a puller. There's 4 bolts, 2 large ones and 2 very small ones on the bottom, and just the screws that go around the perimeter after you take off your windshield molding. And then you can just let the cap hang on the windshield wiper arms, and then when you're ready, you just lift it off and put it on the floor in front of you. Then all your quick connect fittings to do. You're going to have to disconnect the marker lights or cut the wires for the marker lights and just reconnect them later on. When you put the cap back on, just set it in front here, do all your connections, get it all set up, and we'll rehang it right on the windshield wiper arms, lift it up and install our bolts. It's easy to put in the small screws first and then bolt it later. Getting the wires from doing after is almost just as easy. Maybe don't know it much. Silicone back underneath the cap. So we're going to a little water from running down. When you take the cap off, you have to slice along this area. Same on the other side. One of the places that impact screwdriver is very handy, because these are very rusty screws when they're you always want to use new screws when you put back together. One thing to mention is when I take the windshield wiper blades off, I mark with a piece of masking tape the position of the blades so that they can go right back on where the customer originally had them. First step I like to do is use a white wall tire cleaner straight and wash, get it good and wet, straight on. This will loosen any wax, silicones, or grease. Now I've got the screw cover molding, plastic insert molding off because that traps a lot of water. You're going to have to get all this water out or give it a while to dry. If you're in a situation where you're going to have a lot of toxins flying in the air, you kind of have to do this in linear time or you could get recontaminated. Rinse that off. Now you could dry it and Scotch-Brite it. Another technique that works really well is using an abrasive scrubber. This has to be a really good soap, this scrubber. The stem. Whoops. Scotch-Brite, scrub it, and you'll feel the abrasive power. This does a great job of getting in the nooks and crannies. What I usually do is do a side, and then come back with the brush, a stiff wash brush, a little bit more water, and scrub off that again, and then rinse it with another wash down with either diluted white wall tire cleaner or straight again. Vacuum out all the water, let her drip dry, wipe it off, open your doors and suck out the water from around the screws and hinges. This does the greatest job of scuffing those. You can use light abrasive scouring powder, just like you would use in your house, with bleach or without bleach. Do the same thing. Use the same brush. Scrub this in a little bit more. Now again, nooks and crannies that you don't get. But you can, after it dries, you don't see any shiny parts that you can touch up with the Scotch-Brite. But the water method needs least amount of solvent in the shop. And this is what you want to do before any paint job is get everything absolutely off before you sand or scuff with the heavy detergent. Then you just rinse this off really, really well. I like to dry with regular paper towels, white, non-printed.
Scotch-Brite. After you've washed it, you can do a dry method of sanding, scuffing, Scotch-Brite pad. A lot of people prefer this because there's a lot less chance of water getting into your paint. In both cases, I've taken the vinyl molding and I've washed and dried it separately to keep it a little bit warm and reinserted it so there's no water in the molding. Using HVLP, you're not going to have as much trouble with stuff blowing around, but conventional spray guns, you're going to have a little more water possibility of being able to get blown around. Wipe down with the tack cloth. It usually gets enough dust out of the program. Any big goopers in there. Just going to tape up my door lock. Ready to shoot. Okay, I'm going to use Chroma 1. This is for the white Phylon repair. Chroma 1 regular spot panel reducer, my custom mix Chroma color, which I'll give you some paint numbers, Chroma 1 hardener. Now this DuPont universal flattener will work in Chroma 1 or Imron, and you can reduce it about 25% of your mixture, and that'll give you a little flatter finish to start with. This Chroma Clear blender is a product that you can use to feather out your edges. You just use it like you're doing it with the clear, but you just add it to your paint after your first or second coat. You can add it to your third coat, and it'll blend your areas, be a lot less buffing or sanding, or sometimes none at all. Not flush it off. And after wipe down with the tack cloth, apply our first coat of finish of the Chroma 1. What I do is, as soon as it starts to tack off a little, I have a few sheets of this Saran wrap or Reynolds wrap, the clear plastic wrap, ready. And I just go right into the paint and start dabbing it around. You can think about if you want to do a lot of cover up first, you can put a first base coat on and let that flash off before you do your texture coat on your second coat. But if you have to play with this a little. And as you get near the edges of your repair, you texture it less. In the middle, you be a little more aggressive, but it works quite well. And you just need to do it once or twice, and you get the hang of how you like it. But usually, you want to cover the whole surface with blotches first. Let that dry pretty good, and then apply your coats. You'll bring it right back to the primer in spots, and that's fine. Just play around with this a little. It's a lot of fun, and it really works well. Here's another example of texturing on a different surface, more or less the same thing, just play around with it a little, get a little texture in there, eliminates that totally smooth look when you're painting. If you do come back and buff over this a whole bunch, you will get rid of a lot of this texturing. So After trying it a few times, you usually get what's acceptable to you, and you can try on a few test pieces.
A few words about painting. Always use recommended respirator equipment when painting. This usually means use an outside supplied forced air respirator system. There are also systems that filter your compressed air. If you haven't ever painted auto body paints, you might want to seek the advice from a local automotive paint supplier. Most of the larger auto parts dealers have a paint representative person who can help you get set up with your paint system. Always ask to talk to one of the paint persons. More important than the paint's brand name is the sales support for the product line. A paint rep will have definite answers to your questions and will recommend specific products to suit your situation. It's especially helpful to get a paint rep to visit your work area. We're putting on Imran Metallic from DuPont here. All these solid color or metallic accent colors aren't textured. You just spray them on. Don't worry about texturing them. They look much better if you don't. The texturing only comes into play when you're making a repair over a small area to match areas that haven't been repaired. But usually when the colored accent coats go on, there's no texturing needed, and you're looking for a little bit more gloss or shine. As we mentioned earlier, there's flattening agents where if you have to pull back shine, your rig's a lot older, you don't want to have a bright gloss. Mostly in the solid color upper body fireline colors, we will usually add the flattener so that you don't end up with such a bright glossy area amidst a big area of slightly dulled or normal looking fiberglass reinforced plastic. You can also do that in your solid color or metallic color accent colors to bring back the shine. It shows a lot less imperfections when you dull back your paint a little. It's your call. It's something you can experiment with. But usually I never go over 25% of reduction with the flattening agent. A quick word on caulking out. This is clear silicone. Winnebago uses their, what's it called? Pure Bond 190. That actually is, you can mix with paint, dries very quickly. But I like to use clear silicone on a dark surface. You will get the mildew with a very small bead. You won't have to go back and finger trawl, but I'm going to show you finger trawling. You may have lots of versions of it. Always have a towel ready to wipe your tip just before you get back into the bead. When you're finger troweling, have a clean paper towel in your hand at all times. Once you've used it once or twice, just throw it on the floor. You wipe your finger for the excess. Any excess that you have, just take it off. If you need more, you can add a little later. Take your time caulking out. This is the last detail and can bring the whole project together. And it's the first line of protection for the whole job. Remember to caulk out everything. As you take things apart, notice what was caulked. Your feature strips are very important to re-caulk. In any case, be color conscious. Go to the trouble of getting proper colored caulk, the off-white or colonial white, the bright white, beige. They're all available. If you've gone this far in a project, take the time to get the right colored caulk. Now, if you're on a surface and you get too much caulking on, you use your paper towel and just make one white and then change the space on it and make the other white. That way you get all the material off and you don't just smudge it around and end up with those big, ungodly black covered silicone smears all over the camper. Silicone's the easiest to work with and will give excellent results. Urethane caulks
Caulks like Socaflex come in a good arrangement of colors, have excellent weatherproofing and bonding properties. They're a little harder to work with, but you may find some other caulks out there that work well for you. Most important is get a good color match and use a good clean surface, and it'll work well for you. In some instances, you'll find that the caulking has to get put on before you do your painting. In that case, you're going to have to use paintable silicone, or urethane, or some other caulk that's paintable, and you have to let that dry before you apply your paint. So sometimes you have to do that a whole day in advance. Thanks for watching the video. Look for additional information in the accompanying booklet. I wish you well in your projects, and above all, keep safety in mind. Read and understand all the safety information that accompanies your tools and supplies. See you soon.